All right, everybody, thanks for being back in class. I'm doing this one from home because I didn't have time to do it at school yesterday. So here are your rules for voice leading. We're talking about voice leading today, so this is kind of the next logical step towards what we did with counterpoint. Right after counterpoint in the Renaissance, we move into the Baroque era, and this is where counterpoint becomes a big deal. So think about Bach chorales, anything like that. That's voice leading central. So there are what we're going to do today is I'm going to go over some of the rules for the stylistic practices of counterpoint, and then after that we will talk about some of the rules that you should absolutely avoid. So unbreakable rules, some rules that are to be avoided but can be broken if necessary, and then we're going to go over an example from each of the three assignments for this week. And I'm going to have you guys do 9.1 through 9.3. I'm not going to make you guys do 9.4. So let's get started. All right, so we have voice leading stylistic practice rules, and the book calls it stylistic practice. All right, these are just sort of the rules for the various types of chords. So AKA rules for stylish harmony. All right, so rules 1 through 5 apply directly to chords that are in root position. So any chord that's in root position. 6 through 8 are going to apply for first inversion only. And then rule number 9 is for second inversion only. We'll get to that in a second. So I kind of laid them all out on the board in an awkward fashion, but wanted to get them all on. All right, so root position rules. The first one is keep the common tone and move the remaining two voices stepwise to the nearest chord tone when the root is a perfect fourth or perfect fifth apart. All right, so when the root, and if you look here, right here, all right, so very closely, I made them small. Let me see if I can get this in a little bit further. So when we are in root position specifically, all right, so 5 to 1, there's no 6, there's no 6/4. And the bass note, which is also the root, goes either up or down by a perfect fourth or a perfect fifth. So the first chord and the second chord, perfect fourth or perfect fifth apart. All right? That means that you're going to try to keep one tone as a common tone, because they will share one tone in the chords. So that means this D is going to stay the same, all right? And then the other two voices are either going to move up or down, doesn't matter, to the nearest spot in that chord, all right? So in this case, we have a 5 chord. So our chord is, let's see, it's a D, F sharp, A chord, right? So DFA are our possibilities. And then we move to 1, which that's a G, B, D chord. So if we move it here, G, B, D, like that, right? Oops, get rid of that E down there. So notice that they have one common tone, right? The D is the same. So you keep the D wherever the D is, if you can. Then you're going to keep that D, and then the other two are just going to move to the nearest stepwise. And this could mean leaving out the fifth of the chord, so you could end up doubling the root or doubling the third, something like that. So that is stylistic practice number 1. And generally, as a rule, if you can keep your common tone, as many common tones as possible, keep them. That's just a general good rule. Let's see if I can get this a little bit closer so you can see it. We'll move it down as we go. All right, so number 2, if the common tone cannot be kept. So this is a situation where there isn't a common tone that can be kept. Maybe it's the common tones in the bass, something like that, or it's already written out and it's in the soprano line and they switched it. Then what you're going to do is move all three upper voices in similar motion to the nearest chord tone. All right? When the root is P4 or P5. So if you cannot keep a common tone, right, you're going to move all of the voices because the bass is already set, so you don't have a choice where to move that. But the other three tones are going to move in similar motion. So they're either all three going to move down or all three are going to move up. All right? So and you can see here in example 2, we have our bass goes down a perfect fifth like that, right? And then we can't keep our common tone because we're going from 5 to 1. We don't end up sharing that tone. And what you're going to do is, well, the common tone has to change basically because the common tone is in the bass. All three of these, they all shift down either a step or maybe a third, but most of them jump down a step. So A goes down a step, the alto goes down a third, and the tenor goes down a third, all right? So just as close as you can get it, basically, all right? So our third rule for root position is keep both common tones and move the upper voice stepwise when the root is a major third or minor third apart. So when you're dealing with when the root or the bass line is a third apart, you've got actually two common tones. You end up with two common tones just by the very nature of the way the chords are shifting if it's in root position. So you're going to keep both those common tones. So if you can keep a common tone as a general rule, keep it. And then move the upper voice stepwise, whatever upper voice doesn't get to keep the common tone, when the root is a major third or minor third apart. So you can see right here, and these are all in your book. So the stepwise stylistic practice rule number 1 is in, let's see, it's in figure 9.5 if you want to look at that. And the stylistic practice rule number 2 is also in 9.5. And now we're moving on to 9.6. All right? So this is 9.6. You're going to keep both common tones. All right? So you can see here, our bass goes down a major third. And then what happens is we keep the G and we keep the B. And then in the soprano line, it moves up to E. All right? So that's the only tone that doesn't stay. Okay? All right, so our next rule, move the three upper voices in contrary motion to the bass when the root is a major second or minor second part, all right? So this deals specifically with when the bass line is a major or minor second, so it's moving stepwise, all right? So basically, if the bass is moving up, everything else, all the other voices are going to move down, all right? If the bass is moving down, all the other voices are going to move up, all right? So they're just going to go opposite of each other. And that's the idea, if you can. Now, obviously, these are rules that sometimes have to be broken and you can't get around it. So those are rules for root position chords. Now, if we move along, let me just shrink this down because I can't move this board up and down. If we look at first inversion, all right, chords, there are 3 rules that you've got to remember. Double any part of the chord if it helps the voice leading, particularly in the soprano and the bass. So feel free, if it helps with the voice leading and you know, following the other rules, feel free to double any part of the chord. All right, you could double the third, the fifth, the root, doesn't matter. And it's especially good if you can double the soprano or the bass. All right? The one thing you never want to do is double the leading tone. So if you're in the key of, say, D minor or D major, and you have the option of doubling the C sharp, do not double the C sharp. Double anything else but the C sharp. So that's a major rule. The other one you've got to remember is, and these are for specific chords, when you're dealing with the diminished first inversion seventh chord, all right? So diminished seventh and first inversion. You want to double the third or fifth, all right? So not the tonic. And try to move the other voices stepwise. You also want to avoid tritone skips. In general, you want to avoid tritone skips, but especially when you're dealing with first inversion. So you don't want one voice, like the alto, to move from, say an E natural to a B flat. So you want to avoid that tritone right there. And then finally, for first inversion, this is when dealing with the diminished second chord in first inversion. So this should be diminished right there. So for diminished 2 in first inversion, you're going to also double the third or the root, so not the fifth. Double the third or the root. And then also you're going to try to move the other voices stepwise and avoid tritone skips. So just remember that for the seventh, you're going to double the third or the fifth, and for the second, you're going to double the third or the root. All right? Now, last but not least, when we're dealing with second inversion, keep shrinking this down. This is a little bit longer. So you're going to use with caution, all right? So you use second inversion in general with caution because it is unstable. It's very unstable in its very nature. If you do use it, you're going to double the bass note, whatever the bass note is, which is technically the fifth, if it's in second inversion, right? So the bass note is going to be doubled, and you're going to approach and depart with as few skips as possible. So approach and depart with stepwise motion for all of the other voices, for all of the voices in general, all right? And then only in an arpeggiated 6/4 chord is the bass approved or left by a skip. So you can only leave it by a skip instead of a step if it's arpeggiated or, spread out as the chord. And then you're also only to use this with cadential, passing bass, arpeggiated bass, and pedal bass. And if you want more information on those, they are on page 201 of your book in figure 9.6. We'll go over that a little bit more. I don't want to write them all out on the board, but you can get a good idea of it. So if we look at figure 9.6, these are examples with which you are allowed to use second inversion. So in a cadential passing tone, right, it means that it's being used as part of a cadence, all right? So either half cadence, perfect authentic cadence, something like that. In a passing bass, right, it means that it's being used as a passing tone, right? So you can get away with it if it's a passing tone, or you can call it a passing tone even though it's a new chord. An arpeggiated bass, right? So you've got the arpeggio right here outlining the chord, and you can get away with that because there's not a lot of other movement. You can see there's only the soprano is moving with the bass. All right? And then in pedal bass, you can see that we're holding, the bass note isn't changing, right? But you're essentially changing up the chord in the middle, right? So you're creating a new chord and then going on. So it's a pedal point. Those are the only instances where you're allowed to use second inversion, all right? So let's talk about some of the unstylistic departures. And these are the ones that you're not allowed to violate under any condition.